I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that I'm facilitating this webinar from the lands of the Kaurna people in South Australia. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from those joining in from around the country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to extend our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining our webinar today. Welcome to colleagues joining us from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now mai haere mai. I hope I pronounced that correctly. A very warm welcome to the next instalment of DVE's Fireside series in 2023. Today's webinar focuses on can work integrated learning meet Australia's future workforce needs? My name is Emma Lawrence and I am a senior higher education consultant here at DVE and I'll be facilitating today's session. A little bit about DVE. We are a consultancy who's been providing solutions for over 15 years in the higher education sector. We've worked with over 36 Australian universities and numerous TAFEs, RTOs and private providers to deliver hundreds of projects across our business lines, which are governance and compliance, organisational improvement and digital transformation, including our clinical placement management system. We work across all aspects of the education life cycle, whether it's through initial or re-registration and accreditation, process improvement, student experience, change, communications and systems implementation. I'll just touch briefly on housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared to everybody after today. As part of the webinar setting on Zoom, you will be on mute throughout the session. We've had an overwhelming number of questions submitted during the registration and it's clear that WIL is the hot topic of the season. And I hope our discussion will cover the majority of those questions. If we have time, we will try to respond to some of them. And I apologise in advance if we don't get round to the question that you asked. You can also submit additional questions through the Q&A function on Zoom and we'll try to answer some of those at the end if they haven't been covered already or we have time. I do want to let you know that we will be holding a second WIL Fireside Chat webinar in the first quarter of 2022 after the release of the final accord document. And some questions we received for this session may be answered in the release of that final accord document, particularly those around the funding of WIL. I'd like to now introduce our panellists. Professor Ruth Bridgestock has more than 15 years academic leadership experience and is internationally recognised as a researcher in graduate employability, education for the future of life and work, and authentic curriculum and pedagogy. She is currently the Director Employability at Swinburne University and is Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, a TEXA expert, AAUT award winner, and Australian National Senior Teaching Fellow for Graduate Employability 2.1. Professor Joanne Wright joins us from the University of Sydney, where she is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education. Joanne has a well-established relationships in the higher education sector, serving as a member of several national advisory bodies and working groups through Universities Australia and the Group of 8. She is responsible for the University of Sydney's strategy around teaching, learning and students' educational experience. Prior to joining the University of Sydney, Professor Wright was Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic at the University of Queensland. Dr. Nicolene Murdoch commenced as the Chief Executive Officer of Western Sydney University in 2018. She's now taken up the position of Pro Vice-Chancellor Educational Partnerships and Quality at the university. She provides high-level advice and counsel to the university's senior executive and contributes to Western Sydney University's success by enhancing the suite of quality educational products and leads the implementation of new whole-of-university approach to program quality. I'd like to thank Joanne, Nicolene and Ruth for joining us today to help us understand the role of WIL and Australia's future workforce needs. So I'll start with a little bit of scene setting. Ruth, I've heard a bit about the Swinburne moonshots. How do they relate to WIL?
Yes, thanks, Emma. Swinburne moonshots. So Swinburne's current strategic institutional plan is called Horizon 2025, and it sets out its aspirations around being a prototype of a new and different sort of university. And within it, it commits to moonshots, which are sort of big strides, a plan or aim to do something that seems almost impossible. is the way it's described. And we have 4 of these. The first 2 of which are about WIL and employability. So our first moonshot is every learner gets a work experience. And the second moonshot is every graduate gets a job. I was brought on board at Swinburne explicitly to sort of spearhead, champion, and generally pom-pom wave around these moonshots. Not wanting to preview too much of the discussion too quickly, but I was amazed, bowled over, and just humbled by the fact that we have achieved Moonshot 1 already. So every undergraduate and vet learner has at least 1 work integrated learning experience while they're with us. And also we are approaching 100% undergraduate scaffolded WIL, which means a coherent and logical progression of work integrated learning experiences throughout the curriculum, with at least 1 at every level of the course. So that's what we're doing at Swinburne around moonshots.
How long has that taken you?
I've been with Swinburne now for 2.5 years. Of course, Swinburne's been offering WIL for 60 years now. They talk about it as being part of our institutional DNA. And so when I arrived, practice was pretty mature, and they'd already brought together a group of practitioners, educators, and people involved in sort of policy settings and strategy to drive the moonshots. So they pretty much slotted me in, and we were up and good to go. So it's been going on for quite some time. That's
an astounding achievement in a few years. That really is. Yeah, well done to Swinburne.
I'm very proud of everybody at Swinburne.
Oh, you should be. Nicolene, I know that WSU is just at the beginning of a wider WIL integration across the institution. What are some of the issues that you've come across in attempting to reach the aspirational targets of Swinburne?
Thank you so much, Emma, for the question. At Western Sydney University, we on that journey of reconceptualizing WIL, like many other institutions, and probably not as far as advanced as some of my colleagues on the panel today. We've gone through an extensive process of centralization, decentralization, which would be something that is quite familiar in other institutions and in the sector. So we are on closing the loop on a service improvement process. So we really working on the cultural piece. We're working on the cultural piece of the understanding of WIL that's much broader than just placements. We're doing some very good work. We have schools, academics doing some good work, pockets of excellence, but now it is to your question about integration, and it's to ensure that we have an institution-wide approach. Our policies and procedures is very much focused on placements. So I'm very proud of the work that my colleagues are doing, and I'm sure many of them are online today in the policy and procedure space, but it's now extending that to be more expansive and include the full definition of WIL. We're also working on some systems and process efficiencies, which I think even when we achieve major goals, like in the case of Swinburne, there's always room for improving efficiencies. So that's a big objective for us at the moment, to avoid duplication, to make sure that there's clarity around roles and responsibilities. And the final challenge that we have is around reporting and recording of WIL and all that goes with it, and that sort of reconceptualization, and to make sure that we have an accurate reporting framework, and that we know what everyone is doing, and that we can make sure that we get efficiencies through that.
Do you have a time frame for when you need to have WIL integrated across the institution?
So we're working towards next year. So at the moment we are consulting with schools. We've done some work in determining which subjects have WIL components in them. We've done an assessment of all the staff across the different schools and their roles and where they link and where they have some functions and coordinating functions in WIL. So we're aiming to, at least by the end of next year, to have a position on our reconceptualization.
Interesting. Joanne, where does Sydney sit in between the Swinburne, who has got 100% WIL, and WSU that's sort of on the way to getting there? Where does Sydney sit?
I think
Joanne,
the short answer to that is we don't have enough WIL opportunities for our students. I mean, the University of Sydney has 75,000 students. Nearly 50% of those are international students. And of course, there can be extra barriers and difficulties in getting international students into WIL. So it would be really great to hear if anybody has any ideas. But the present data around Sydney is we have nearly 2,800 unique undergraduate students in WIL. We have 2,250 postgraduate students in WIL. Now, they're not evenly distributed across the university, and this is another challenge. Most of those, of course, are in professional type courses. So they're in education, they're in medicine, they're in allied health, social work, you know, those sorts of programs that require WIL. The more voluntary WIL, if I can present it that way, in other subject areas is quite problematic for us. So what we have done is we have created these things called interdisciplinary, community and professional units. And we have 12,000 students enrolled in one of these. And what they are, they're not WIL per se, but what we do is we bring collections of students together from different disciplines, and business gives us a problem that these students work towards solving. So it's not strictly speaking WIL, but it has components of WIL in that they are working on a real industry or community problem. But, you know, as I say, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, we have problems with developing deep relationships with partners. Sydney probably has more advantages than many other universities. So if we're struggling, I'm sure others are struggling. There's the cost issue. There are lots of issues. So I'm really keen to hear if people have got ideas as to how because it's so popular with students. Our students really, really love to do it. I've told you the unique student numbers. If I was to tell you the enrollment numbers, they would probably be double, because students choose to do more than one work integrated learning experience where they can. So it's very popular. It's, I think, critically important going forward also, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. So we have quite a lot, but not as much as our students would like.
And I think that's one of the things that I'm sure everybody is thinking about is traditional placement type opportunities, particularly for health sciences and even engineering are very prescriptive. But I think universities probably have to become much more creative about what they decide WIL is. And because it's just the sheer volume of what you need to provide to students is almost impossible to get. So I think that creativity about what institutions determine as WIL is going to be a key factor in meeting workforce needs. Thank you, Joanne. Ruth, what do you think are Australia's future workforce needs, and how does an institution predict the future in relation to delivering the skills that graduates might need in 2 years' time, or 5 years' time, or even 10 years' time? How do you do that?
That's a really good question, Emma. I think it's actually impossible to predict with a great deal of specificity the kinds of skills and capabilities that graduates are going to need and exactly what the workforce needs are going to be. We know, for instance, that the way that disruptive innovation works is that, you know, it comes in and then everything in economic sectors changes. So, for instance, with the sharing economy and social media a few years back, all of a sudden, that kind of business model permeated the entire economy and changed many of the job roles and those tasks inside roles. So I don't think that we can predict with specificity exactly what our graduates are going to end up doing or what the workforce needs are going to be. But what we can do is we can strategize so that our graduates are set up with really great foundational, professional, critical and metacognitive skills and career self-management, so that they are prepared for whatever vicissitudes lie ahead of us. That's the first answer that I'd share. I mean, the second answer is probably a broader one, and it's also maybe a bit of a fun one. A couple of years back, some colleagues of mine at Deakin and I decided that we were going to do a research project, which was about what are the jobs of the future likely to be. And this was sort of a way to help young people in sort of mid-high school, so thinking about 13 to 15-year-olds, to really make sense of all of the changes that are going on in the workforce. And this sort of idea, everybody talks about there are jobs that just haven't been invented yet, and you might be doing that. And that can be a source of great anxiety to a young person. And so we thought, well, what if we do a bit of research about this that will help make the future more tangible? So we did 100jobsofthefuture.com, that's where it lives. And we interviewed experts from various cutting edge fields and commentators around trends in sort of economic, environmental, social change. And from that, those themes, we created 100 indicative jobs of the future and a bit of a quiz for young people to do, so that they've got something to sort of, what am I interested in? Okay, what are some possibilities for me? From that, I'm proud to say that we've actually had a reasonably significant proportion of those 100 jobs come through into reality just in the last few years. So there must be something in what we did. But yeah, I mean, top thing would of course be in terms of professional skills. 99 of those 100 jobs were involved in digital engagement in some sort of way, whether or not that's use of digital tools or creation or some kind of aspects of supply chain around digital tools. The one remaining job was analog experience guide, which was helping people to unplug from their digital lives. Anyway, 100jobsofthefuture.com, I'd encourage everybody to check it out. It's fun, but it's also really interesting to think about what the possibilities in the future might be.
Okay, that's a really, really interesting thing. Thank you for sharing that. Joanne, do you think it's appropriate for WIL providers to have a say in skills-based curriculum development? And if so, I know that a lot of programs have advisory boards, which often have people sitting on them from external organisations. What's the best way to make sure that we're matching the skills that employers will need in the future with the curriculum development?
Well, I think, Emma, you have actually quite largely answered the question yourself. I mean, I do think it is legitimate for employers to have a say on skills development and skills needs. Of course, universities have to take ultimate responsibility for the quality of what they're offering and for the graduate outcomes. But I do think that the WIL experience will be better for students and have better learning outcomes if there is a kind of joint development of WIL experiences involving students as well as academics, as well as employers. So I think all round it's going to be better if this is a really strong partnership, but recognizing that universities have a different role. It's not their job just to produce graduates for industry X. But I do think now a good way to get that is indeed industry advisory boards, and we, like many other institutions, would have quite a lot of those. They would meet perhaps no more than once or twice a year. But they're also very good for developing your sector relationships. We would also get input from various employer surveys that we would do. and of course the GOS survey. So as I say, I do think it's legitimate. Indeed, I think it is a better experience for the student and the employer, because one of the things that I think is really quite interesting is really encouraging the employers and those where the student is being placed or having the experience to think of themselves as teachers. So again, you know, to get them involved in the curriculum design helps them think about, how can I teach this student what I think they need to know? So you're also introducing the employers to pedagogies, and again, helping deepen that relationship for the longer term.
I suppose it's also too finding a sort of fine line of what are the base skills that a university needs to provide through their teaching programs. What are the base skills, and then where it then becomes the responsibility of a future employer to develop those base skills to meet whatever they need.
Correct. And of course, for many academics, particularly in very research-intensive ones like the University of Sydney, the debate about whose job it is to give skills is actually quite a hot one. And skills is not always a very welcome word in some very academic departments. But nonetheless, you know, our graduates, we all have graduate outcomes. They do have to prepare students for some sort of world of work. They do have to give transferable skills. I hate the phrase soft skills, because I think those soft skills are actually hard skills, not soft skills. They're much harder than learning how to do a quadratic equation, actually. But, you know, we do want students to be able to communicate, to collaborate, and those are the sorts of skills that are very well delivered through an academic purpose and are very transferable to the world of work.
Excellent, thank you. And this is the question for all three of you. How do universities ensure consistency of WIL experiences, particularly if different types of experiences are available to a student? So, for example, a 2-week overseas study tour versus a 6-month internship. So, how do universities ensure that WIL is consistent? Should you be measuring types of experience rather than just WIL generally against itself?
So, Emma, I would actually say that those two things are actually not necessarily synonymous. The kind of consistency would be, are they delivering on the learning outcomes that they are designed to do? So, you know, a 6-month placement in a hospital ward is possibly trying to do something very different from a 2-week tour of stock exchanges in Tokyo or C-suites in Paris. But the equivalence is they are delivering what you were telling the student they're going to get out of it, and the student finds it worthwhile. And again, we would be looking at that through various student feedback, through student performance, again, to make sure that they are delivering what they say they do, you know, are consistent and BAU quality assurance mechanisms.
Nicolene or Ruth, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yes, I'm happy to add.
Go ahead, Nicolene.
Thank you. I was thinking very much along the lines and of what Joanne just shared with us, whether differentiation is not a better outcome than consistency necessarily, because I don't think all of these experiences need to be the same, but linked to outcomes, and differentiation can really give, you know, that flavor that you need. So I think that's the challenge, is there's elements in it that should be consistent. The experience of the students, how we engage with students, how we connect them, how we link them up with employers. There's certain sort of basic things that need to be consistent, but then we cannot strive for consistency and make all of these experiences the same. I think the consistency should be around our institutional practices of how do we ensure compliance of students for the documentation that they have to provide, but really think out of the box in terms of differentiated experiences. We see in the Greater Western Sydney area, our graduates, they're entrepreneurs and they want to start their own businesses. So to put them at one of the big consultancy firms for, you know, a WIL experience is not necessarily the best for them. It would be connecting them with small businesses in the Greater Western Sydney area. So it's really about applying those filters to what students need, and back to Joanne's point about what's the outcome that we want to achieve.
Right.
I'm completely with Joanne and Nicolene, and I also want to do a quick shout out to Joanne from what she said just before about soft skills, because I also loathe that term. Transferable skills, generic skills, even professional skills, I can do that, but soft skills, no way. Soft skills are challenging. Anyway, I digress. I'm completely with both Joanne and Nicolene when it comes to, I mean, the very fact that WIL experiences are not equivalent to one another is a source of great richness in learning. And providing we have our quality assurance mechanisms through our core subject accreditation, we should be confident that whatever the WIL experience, it's going to be a valuable one for students. I know that sometimes thinking about our experiences at Swinburne, there's been a few discussions about, you know, what volume of a work integrated learning experience might be appropriate inside, say, an internship unit. And we found that, you know, our professional internship units, which are a part-time experience, one of 4 units inside a particular full-time study load, sort of about 140 hours, 120 to 140 hours, with appropriate coursework, reflection, and so on around it. But in other areas, so for instance, a school-based internship, they might have a mini internship arrangement, which might only be sort of 2 weeks part-time with reflection around it, and additional coursework in addition. It all depends on, you know, the pedagogic and curricular context for that unit, for that experience, and bearing in mind discipline specificities. But it's so exciting because the range of WIL experiences that we're starting to see it's really expanding, and it's really starting to meet student learning needs.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. And following on from that, one of the registrants put through a really, I thought was a great question, is that how do universities ensure that WIL promotes learning at that higher education level and doesn't become more aligned with a trade model of education? And interesting because you know, Swinburne's a vet provider as well. Yeah, so we are.
We are. I mean, quickly around quality, I dare say Joanne and Nicolene have some thoughts here too, but around quality for me, there is the National WIL Quality Framework, which is a great start. It's on the ASIN website, and it was developed through an extensive process of consultation led by Matthew Campbell and colleagues right around the nation. It's a great start for institutions that want to develop up an institutional approach to quality in WIL. There are a lot of standards, and they cover elements of the student experience, elements of curriculum design, and then institutional requirements. And I tell you what, it's the most comprehensive thing I've ever seen. It's a great start. So what we did then at Swinburne was we institutionalized it. So we had a look at it and said, what here fits for Swinburne? What makes the most sense for Swinburne? What makes the most sense for Swinburne's educators in practice? How does it fit with our policy and our protocols and so on? So that's my brief opening around quality. I think that we've already got existing institutional quality assurance mechanisms that I won't call out here because I think that we're probably aware of them. But for WIL specific stuff, start with the ASIN framework. It's pretty good. The second question there would be, how do you then operationalize that? So how do you evaluate against those standards? And at the moment, we're working on a pretty solid piece of work around building a comprehensive evaluation framework for work integrated learning right across our institution. It's one of these things where, you know, we scaled and scaffolded WIL. We put together institutional supports for educators and for students, for industry partners. And now we're sorting out the processes, the protocols, making sure that everything is lined up and watertight when it comes to policy. So yeah, that would be my first answer. Then the second thing, which is around how do we ensure that WIL promotes learning at higher level and doesn't become more aligned with trades models? I think, I mean, there's a lot of value in the trades models of learning. So, I mean, we've got a lot of, you know, educational theorists, Dewey and Vygotsky and so on, who've, you know, built a significant tranche of practice and literature around hands-on situated learning. And really, this is how human beings naturally learn as well. So there's value in that. And I think higher education, by contrast, and I'm setting up a binary here that's a bit artificial, but bear with me. Higher education can come out of more of a behaviorist or a cognitivist sort of paradigm with, you know, sort of theory, knowledge, analysis, these kinds of approaches, your traditional lecture tutorial model. Again, I'm slightly uncomfortable with this binary, but let's persevere. I don't think we're too much in danger of lurching if we embrace WIL to a trades model of just sort of hands-on, of too much hands-on. I think our challenge is actually to embrace the strengths of both traditions of learning. So how do we combine, synthesize our strengths in WIL of hands-on, situated, authentic, working with colleagues, with our sort of higher level reflection, critical thinking, professional skills and knowledge. That's really interesting, that interface for me. And for me, that piece is about sense making. It's about the student going, okay, I've had some theory and some knowledge development here in this way. I'm having some hands-on experience. How can I translate between these two in order to deepen my learning and in order to head me in a direction also in my life and career? I think that universities do this okay. I did a research study a few years back called How Future Capable Are Our University Courses? And maybe we've improved since I did that study. But at the time, our reflection and our sense-making pedagogy was not that well advanced. The other key thing that I would suggest that we could do to augment our pedagogy in this space is to include an explicitly future or forward-looking focus. So including a lot more sort of innovation, horizon thinking sorts of things. And the other thing is networked learning. So out there, we know that people are learning from others in practice, naturally and organically. And yet in higher education institutions, and I'm going to say something provocative here, I know because the webinar people can't talk back. We don't let our students out organically enough to learn from professionals, from others who are interested in practice. Instead, we let them out only under very prescribed circumstances. And I'm wondering what that means for their professional networks and their professional learning going forward.
It's an interesting concept. Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. Joanne and Nicolene, have you got any thoughts on?
I think, Emma, you know, there is a great variety of skills, right? And we shouldn't actually shy away from sometimes you need skills. Let's take dentistry, right?
Yeah.
You want your dentist to be competent of injecting you in the right place. Okay, so that is a competency or a skill that you need. But perhaps you also want your dentist to be able to deal with a nervous patient. Now, that is a skill that probably requires much more in the way of a theoretical context, of a reflection. So I think that for us, and I would also want to call out that ASIN framework. I think it's absolutely fabulous too, Ruth. And it really helps you think about how to keep this at a high level. You know, that you think about what the student does before they go on WIL, what they do while they're on WIL, and what they do when they come back from WIL. So again, for us, probably keeping at a higher education level is all about those skills where you have to deeply reflect on how you've acquired it and how you can improve it. And again, that would be linked to the learning outcomes of the particular WIL experience. But I don't think you need absolutely every single skill to be at higher education level, like an injection in your mouth. There would be plenty other examples like that. That's just the one that freaks me out most.
Yeah, you had dentistry done recently. Okay, I know that feeling. It's an interesting concept because there is a point where it goes, you know, you can provide a student with a certain number of skills or concepts that they think, but the point of education is for them to go out into the world and keep learning, that it's not a finite thing that you stop the minute they graduate, they've got all the skills that they need. So part of this whole experience and WIL should be about equipping students to seek further learning as they go through their careers.
And maybe just to add to what my colleagues on the panel spoke about, and I think we're very much aligned, it's really about the learners going out and putting into action what they have learned. So I don't think we should shy away from whether we call it trade models or vocational skills or whichever term we use to refer to that. I don't think we should shy away from that because there is a place for that. And again, it's about how do we make sure that those skills come across. But what I'm very passionate about is that professional identity, and I think it links to what Ruth was saying, is establishing, building that professional identity, professional readiness. And it's really about what they observe in the workplace and what the supervisors and who they're exposed to, how they behave and what they see. So similar to the other soft skills, I think we're way beyond that, and we need to change the narrative. We need to change the terminology because it has just become, it's always been critical, but our conversation about that needs to progress. And I think I might be jumping ahead, Emma, on a next question, but I think it's linked to the sort of trade level skills conversation, soft skills, or whichever way we refer to them. I read on LinkedIn the other day, so it must be true, that over 90% of employers still think that soft skills, and still using that terminology is really, really important, but only 30% of them think that's what they get from graduates. But I think that's a conversation that we need to have, is what is it, what do we call it, and how is it linked to professional identity, and making sure our students are ready for that transition to the workplace.
Nicoline, do you think then that there needs to be a better understanding, and maybe this is something where those advisory boards come in, on employer understanding of what, and I'll use the term soft skills because it's the easiest one at the moment, what soft skills actually are? Do you think there's a lack of understanding by employers and even WIL providers about what soft skills are?
I think there's a very traditional interpretation of it, and we all agree with things like communication, problem solving. We're not disputing that shouldn't be there, but I think the conversation needs to progress to other skills that need to be added to those sort of basic lists that I think employers are quite attached to. Where I see that specifically is we implement partnership pedagogy, and that means that we engage with employers to participate and to co-design, co-develop with us the WIL experiences and curriculum more broadly, and assessment. And in those conversations, you definitely get the sense that their understanding and interpretation of soft skills is the sort of 5 or 7 or whichever list you want to use of problem solving, communication, and all the other ones. So in those conversations, if we truly want to co-design, it's a facilitated conversation with the employers, and that's why the relationship with them is so important, so that we can feed these narratives into those conversations.
And of course, everybody learns soft skills differently. It's very difficult to completely teach soft skills, because my interpretation of what a skill I might have developed while I was at university is different from the skill that you might have developed at university. So it's also a very, nebulous space where that's concerned. Thank you for that. A question another question for all of you. The focus on WIL has created an unprecedented demand for finding placements in businesses across all the disciplines. I know that it's critical in health sciences, but it's for every discipline. So how do universities compete for placements in the tight market? And how do we ensure as an industry that there's equity, so that students who might be from smaller or regionally based universities that don't have huge resources don't miss out on quality experiences that other institutions might be able to secure?
Shall I jump in? Yes. All right. So there were 2 questions in there. The first was about unprecedented demand, competition for placements, and how do we compete collegially for placements in that sort of tight market. My first question in response is, do we actually need these to be placements? I mean, in some
I'm talking WIL integrated learning. So
all WIL? Okay.
All WIL. Placements, unfortunately, that's my terminology, and I apologise for that. I mean, all WIL.
That's okay.
So
I think, yes, in that case, the first wave of an answer here might be, it's about having a mature WIL ecosystem in part. So yes, we need accreditation placements, these professional placements that our nurses, our social workers, and so on and so forth go on, and our educationalists. They've already got things worked out for this. They pay for placements some of the time, and this seems to be a reasonably functioning kind of segment of WIL. In terms of the rest of the types, and at Swinburne, we've got a classification system. I think every institution does. Ours goes from placements, which is full-time paid, internships, which is part-time, often unpaid, but sometimes paid, industry-linked projects. Similar to Joanne's, interdisciplinary community and professional units, except offered in a variety of different sorts of ways. And study tours, and then there's the simulations in your innovation and entrepreneurship. Sometimes it's appropriate to have a placement. So a student goes in and has an intensive experience for an extended period of time and is paid for it. Great. But it may be more pedagogically appropriate to look for another option, depending on where the student is at with their learning and the disciplinary context. So maybe they're dipping their toe in, they want to do an internship, or maybe they're developing their complex problem-solving skills in an interdisciplinary way, and they might be better off doing an industry-linked project. So that's the first thing. It's about sort of figuring out how many in industry things do we want to have? What proportion? And then designing those in a sophisticated way so that maybe multiple students can engage with a few industry-linked project types. We can have group internships going on, certainly group study tours. We've got a careers unit that Swinburne offers, where it's a beginning one, where students go out in a group and experience workplaces. I'm sure that's a fairly common one, but it's a great way of getting industry experience in a safe way to build confidence. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, in my experience with the labour market as it is, there's employers falling over themselves to offer work integrated learning. They want to grab our graduates like you wouldn't believe. I'm sure this is the case right across the sector, and it's not just Swinburne. But at the moment, in terms of elective WIL, we've got far more industry demand than student demand. And then the challenge becomes, with those industry partners, we share those between and among our schools, our faculties, so that they offer more industry linked projects, internships, and so on. So that's the situation we've got at the moment. It can go both ways. Okay, equity. Right, so how do we ensure equity so that students don't miss out on quality experiences? I think international students is a big one here, and I think Joanne mentioned this at the beginning of the conversation. There is a clause in the Visa 500 requirements, which is about, it's limiting the WIL that international students can do by lumping those hours in with their paid work. And I would love to see that changed. Because at the moment, that means that unless WIL is compulsory in the curriculum, international students are likely not to do it. And that's really not fair to my mind. And I think a lot of us said that in our accord submissions. So we need to really have nuanced approaches when it comes to equity deserving students and international students. So so my industry engagement team have a specific kind of strategic approach when it comes to, we're fostering relationships with industry partners who are inclusive, who have mature ways of working with anybody from diverse backgrounds, but they're also committed to building their skills so that they can do the supervision side of things. That's really important. And then it becomes about meeting and ameliorating those barriers to engagement. So for international students, for instance, we might need to ensure that those experiences are mandatory in the curriculum wherever we can. And if they're not, then we offer stipends to support them. We offer matched internships and experiences to meet specific students' needs, and we provide additional supports for them. I also think, yeah, there's a big piece there about employers stepping up, having those facilitated conversations with us, as Nicolene was saying, engaging in that true partnered pedagogy to make sure that it's all of our students and not just, that perceived top 5% who end up having the great industry experiences. Because let's face it, having diversity in our workplaces is often something that can drive a business or an organization forward through innovation, through appreciation of different sorts of perspectives. And this is the kind of line that we take at Swinburne.
Excellent.
I would just add one point to the list that Ruth has run through, and that's not to underestimate the connections that our students have and the work that they're already doing. And I'm not saying this by any means to say we've got that all worked out, because obviously there needs to be a linkage back to outcomes and how do we manage all of those. But we have students, like all profiles of students where they're already employed, and then we find another placement for them where they would have had a perfect fit. So we shouldn't underestimate the connections students have.
Emma, I would just add one thing that maybe universities could think about collectively might be talking to the accrediting bodies about the volume that is sometimes required. And another thing I'd just throw into the mix that can be quite challenging for us, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it is challenging. We now have to use overseas placements and opportunities quite a lot. And the kind of risk assessment, bureaucracy that we have to go through to that is absolutely mind-boggling. And, you know, to expect a family engineering company in Lahore to fill in a University of Sydney risk assessment, you know, it's tricky.
Yeah, and I came from a study overseas, and I was helping out the Central WIL team at the University of Adelaide with things around international WIL experiences, and there is enormous risk for institutions about it, and you do not have the resources to send staff over to check out every company. You do have to take some on blind faith, and it's a very difficult line, and of course no vice chancellor wants to see that headline in the newspaper. So but also international WIL experiences are incredibly valuable for international students, particularly if they can do those WIL experiences in their home country, because like for a domestic student here, they get that opportunity to have a employer vet them in a supported environment. We have only got 3 minutes left, so I've got one more question for each of you to just give me a couple of thoughts about. And we'll start with you, Joanne, because you're on my screen. What do you think the future of WIL looks like in the changing employment environment?
Look, I'll just go back very simply to something that I said earlier on. I think if you have very strong collaborations around designing the WIL experience between the student, the academic, and the employer, this will all organically develop and evolve into new skills, new professions, new things. So I think partnership is the key.
Excellent. And Nicolene?
Yeah, definitely adding to partnership, as I mentioned before, I would say the future of WIL is we need to think outside the box, and we need to get away from our traditional interpretations and ways of doing WIL and think outside the box. I think the other aspect is the safety and the well-being of our students. A focus, obviously for us and for everyone, that's a focus not only in a WIL environment, but we hear a lot of horror stories from students of how they're being treated during these experiences, all the good work that we're doing with employers. So looking after the safety and well-being of, and that's a tough one. That's really a tough one, because there's an employment relationship. There's, you know, not always the oversight that we're that close. And a final thought is really the authenticity of the experience. We hear from students, they just file things, you know, so it's really making sure that we get to the outcomes and that it's an authentic experience.
Excellent. And finally, Ruth.
I agree with my colleagues on the panel entirely. I think our practice is going to mature. So I think we're going to see increasing diversity of WIL models. We've already started to see, you know, things like hackathons, online consultancies, mini WIL inside subjects with wraparound learning of all sorts. There's a lot of creativity going on already, and industry partners are working with us to facilitate that. I think our capabilities around partnering with industry and with students to make all this happen is also going to mature. And that involves things like whole of institutional industry stewardship models. So how do we make longer term reciprocal beneficial relationships with our industry partners across teaching, across service and community engagement, and across research? So how do we make sure that our partners are sort of lifelong, life-wide style ones? And I think that our practice is also going to mature in terms of support and development for our learners. So reasonable adjustments and inherent requirements, these sorts of questions around, you know, if I'm from a diversity background, or I require reasonable adjustments in order to to engage in professional practice, that support and development is there with me and is there for me, and that the industry partner and my educator support, they're both there, they're on the same page. Moving forward, sort of really making WIL the most that it can be in terms of being it can be very personalised and very flexible in terms of students' learning needs, as well as meeting those overarching learning goals. So I actually think I'm a big fan of WIL, if you hadn't already guessed. And I think we're going to see more and more of it. And I think that we're going to be able to meet these challenges together.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Joanne, Ruth and Nicolene for sharing your insights and thoughts with us today. And thank you to the audience. Apologise for the slight delay in the start. We really do appreciate your interest in this topic, and I do apologise that we weren't able to get round to any questions. We've run over a little bit of time. I hope you found it insightful, and keep an eye out for part 2 in 2024. If any of you are attending NAFIA in Cairns next week, I'd love to meet you in person, so please look out for me. And again, thank you very much for joining us today.